Welcome to Emovura Audiobooks. Every mystery begins with a single clue. Every clue leads to another question, and every question hides a truth. This is Emovura Crime Files. Rewind. Original crime stories. Today's story. The substitute. Let's rewind the evidence. The end. Federal marshals walked quietly into the fourth grade classroom mid-lesson, almost apologetically. Badges kept low and out of the children's direct sightline, and asked Miss Ferris if she would please step out into the hallway for just a moment. There was a small matter they needed to clear up with her. The children never did learn her real name that afternoon, watching wide-eyed through the little door window as their teacher gathered her cardigan off the back of her chair, one boy quietly asking his neighbor if their teacher was in trouble. She didn't argue, didn't ask why, simply nodded the way a person nods when a debt they've been expecting finally comes due. Neither, until that very morning, had the school itself known her real name, and it had employed her steadily, on and off, for nearly 3 quiet years, without a single complaint on file, 3 reference letters, and a laminated Teacher of the Month certificate still hanging in the break room. Hours earlier, a brand-new biometric background check system, installed at the district's central office only that same week as part of a state-mandated safety upgrade, had matched her fingerprints against a federal database within minutes of the routine annual screening. The very first time in 8 careful years that anyone had actually run her real prints instead of simply trusting a name neatly typed on a personnel folder that had followed her from school to school across 2 states. The district's HR coordinator, reviewing the alert late that afternoon, had actually double-checked it twice, certain it had to be a system error, before finally, reluctantly, making the one phone call she'd never expected to make about a teacher 3 separate principals had personally vouched for over the years. Days earlier, she had spent nearly a full decade deliberately taking only long-term substitute positions and the occasional cash-paid tutoring job specifically to avoid any full background screening, ever since the exact day she vanished under the name Renata Cole and quietly became, instead, a dead stranger's borrowed identity named Ferris, a name she'd found on an old headstone in a town 3 states from where she'd started over. Weeks earlier, the name hadn't originally been stolen for any kind of profit. Not really. Renata's former partner, a man named Dominic, had used her identity for years to quietly run a string of fraudulent loans behind her back, forging her signature on documents she never once saw. And when that fraud finally surfaced publicly, he told police, calmly and quite convincingly, sitting across from a detective with his hands folded, that the entire scheme had been her idea from the very start. She fled rather than face criminal charges for crimes that were never truly hers, certain in her bones that no one would ever believe the honest version instead of his. The beginning. Dominic had built his fraud slowly and patiently, one small forged signature at a time, over nearly 2 years, long before Renata ever once suspected what her own good name was quietly being used for behind her back at the bank 2 towns over from where they lived. On the very same morning, marshals finally caught up with her in that ordinary classroom full of 9-year-olds working on a fractions worksheet. Dominic was, in an entirely different state, being convicted of a completely unrelated fraud scheme of his own, the news arriving just late enough to truly matter to anyone but her, proof at last, filed away in a court record somewhere, that he had always been exactly the kind of man capable of everything he had once so calmly blamed on her. You've just listened to Emovura Crime Files. Rewind. If you enjoyed today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. Thanks for listening to Emovura Audiobooks.